Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. I'm Dr. Charles Small. My leadership philosophy is based around stewardship, strategy, and success. I believe that we need to leave our institution better than how we found it. We need to really emphasize this idea of stewardship. We have this responsibility for great, precious resources that the university provides, and that's just not fiscal, it's human resources. Do we implement strategies that emphasize vision, alignment, and execution? And are we really focused on success and those outcomes that are going to help to move the university and our department forward? A lot of my foundation was introduced to me by being a participant in the Dr. Charles Whitcomb Leadership Institute through the NCAA. And it really gave me a foundation to help not only develop that leadership philosophy, but also the skills needed throughout my career that I lean on every day. We appreciate you joining.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive leadership in college athletics. We have two guests today. Our first guest is Ryan Cain. Ryan is the CEO of the Hope Desk and Executive Director of Fund Recovery. And we also have Shelly Mullenix. Shelly is the Senior Associate Athletics Director for Health and Wellness at LSU. Thank you very much for joining us today on 1Q.
Thanks for having us.
Yep.
Thanks, Ty.
Yes, sir. So I wanted to have you on recently over on Athletic Director U. We did a couple of things. We had an experts roundtable where we focused on, there's two schools that I know about, LSU and Michigan State, that have services provided for people who were student athletes on campus, but now have either graduated or finished their eligibility and are out in the world. And Shelly, you can speak to how LSU, you want to be able to provide services for former athletes. Michigan State, the same thing. And I believe Temple may have had something at some point in the past, but they don't have it now. And I don't know what's happening there. But it all ties back to what you do, Ryan. So I think we'll start, with Shelly on why this was important to you, and then talk to us about how you connected with Ryan to put it all together.
Yeah, great. Well, I have been in the role of that senior athletic trainer here at LSU since January of 1997. And have worked, obviously, throughout those years, primarily with football, but more globally with all of our student athletes in kind of the health and wellness space before it was really a thing. What I found over time in being here was that our student athletes, and this may be common with a lot of people, our student athletes, particularly in Louisiana, I'd say, they don't go away. They stay. They either are living in the area within an hour of this area, or they're calling. But it seemed like the same student athletes that I had, worked so closely with as an athletic trainer still were reaching out to me, 5, 10, 15, now 20 years later for some of the same things that we talked about when they were here as student athletes. And we always were here to help. Again, I think because at LSU in particular, there was some consistency with our staff. Ironically, much the same for Michigan State. I know they have athletic trainers that have been there for a long time, so it might be same kind of setup. But they always knew where they can come back to, and they always knew they can trust us, and that we would care for them with, a level of respect and confidentiality and care that they experienced when they were student athletes here. Mm-hmm. So I just continued to kind of do that work. And as, I think the NCAA started talking more about the need for mental health longer term, it was on my mind. It had already been there. We would never turn anyone away here. I'd always help with the referrals anyway. But I essentially got a cold call from one of Ryan's colleagues that was asking about the need for mental health services within our department. I think that was kind of where it was initially going. And, I take very few cold calls, but when they're mental health related, I usually perk up a bit. So took the call, listened to him for a good while, about 15, 20 minutes. And I had just finished a conversation with a colleague of mine, Leanne Westfall, who was running our National L Club, our alumni group at the time. And we had been talking about how we can help extend our care to these student athletes, maybe through her organization, through the alumni group. And it just kind of clicked in my head. I wonder if Leanne would want to hear this, because I wonder if we can pivot what would it look like to pivot to something that we actually need? Because we're well staffed here with mental health providers. We have 3 full-time that are embedded in the athletic department, and we've had that service for quite some time. And we got in a conversation, and I think we set up another phone call after that, and Ryan was able to jump on, and we were able to just kind of really just talk off the cuff about what our needs were. And obviously this was something that he was already engaged with in a different space, but was really trying to think about how we can collaborate on this and make this a product for the collegiate setting, particularly for LSU.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And of course, I'm a Spartan. And so Sally Nogle, she was the athletic trainer for 17,000 years. And, when you go on campus, and we were lucky at Michigan State because Sally was there for a long time. And the strength and conditioning coach, Ken Manny, was there for a long time. And so we just had people that we could relate to, whether or not the football coach changed.
That's right.
Or even the administration was there for a long time too. But still, the trainer and the strength coach are people that you always dealt with as a student athlete. Specifically, a strength coach spent a whole lot more time with student athletes than trainers. You always saw them before practice. You got taped up, whatever it was. And so you're familiar. And so we used to go back and see Sally all the time. So I really can appreciate that. And I guess that cold call came in, Ryan. I wonder about the cold call and the initial question asked. I imagine it was somebody from your crew or the team that you work with. Were they in the know that the NCAA had mandated mental health services for college athletics departments at the time? Or tell me about what you were looking for when the initial call came.
Well, I think it was really purely accidental that we connected on this. We started this program through a partnership with the Pro Football Hall of Fame about 3 years ago, and we were providing mental health services for their members. So, there's about 200 living Pro Football Hall of Famers, and we were supporting those guys and their families. So this would include their spouses, their siblings, their children. In most cases, their children are adult children. And so in some cases, their grandchildren. And part of that initiative, we had built a network of several hundred mental health providers around the country. Now, clearly that we knew that was overkill. There was no way we were going to send, a referral to every provider in that network. But one of the things we were mindful of is that this was a starting point to maybe expand this offering beyond the Hall of Fame. So we spent the first year or so kind of working out the kinks of that program as far as how to access help, what kind of calls we would get, what levels of care we need to make sure we cover, what geographies, how we'd handle financial problems or difficulties when it comes to paying for care. So we kind of worked that out, and we had received a call from Temple University where they had kind of limited resources internally for their current student athletes. And so we were able to partner with them to provide kind of adjunct care. So if the therapists on staff were, overwhelmed with scheduling, we could help them refer out locally. Or if the student athletes went home for Christmas break or summer break to their hometown, wherever that was, we would connect them with a provider there. When we reached out to LSU, I think the idea was we would do something similar as we did at Temple. But as Shelly alluded to, they do such a fantastic job. They've always been ahead of the game when it comes to mental health, and a lot of universities actually model their programs after the work done at LSU. So, it was quickly apparent that they don't really need that kind of offering, but the opportunity we saw to collaborate was on the transition out or to the alumni that are living in other places where, Shelly and her team have a full-time job working with, the staff and coaches on campus. And when you add, a decade plus of student athlete alumni, that becomes an overwhelming number in the 10,000 plus range. So because we had continued to build our network of providers, which is now up to 6,000 mental health providers in Canada and Europe and all over the United States, we're able to kind of centralize those calls under the LSU brand. So that's kind of what the Hope Desk does. It's really not branded as Hope Desk at all. It's called Tiger Legacy Care at LSU. It's got the LSU marks. It's got an LSU phone number, and we handle every call with care, just like they're calling Shelly, and making sure that they're getting the help they need wherever they live.
Yeah, which is excellent. Also, Michigan State, I believe, is alumni state of
Alumni
mind. I
state of
think
mind, right?
alumni state of mind was state capitalized. But I guess I'll ask one more question on the provenance of it. Initially, 3 or 4 years ago, were most of the providers like in the South? What made Temple and then what made LSU the first couple of calls you made when you were expanding out from the college football or the National Football Hall of Fame?
No, it wasn't a geographical thing. We had providers
Yeah,
all over the country
right.
because of the work we'd done with the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It was really who knew people, and
Okay. Yep.
it was just a networking thing. And ironically, that still is what's happening with Hope Desk. People hear about us. Shelly might go to a conference and run into a colleague that has questions about this program, and then we get connected. So we're not out there, knocking on doors or strategically trying to find, a client in a certain part of the country. They just kind of naturally come to us once they realize kind of what this program consists of and how they can do it on their own. It's really not as daunting a task as you might think.
Well, yeah. I mean, with the commonality of providing the best services for student athletes, former student athletes, et cetera. Shelly, I think you told me a story before offline about how Sally connected you with a mental health expert that Coach Saban used when he was at Michigan State from 95 to 99. And then, everything just starts connecting over time and putting things in place when he went down there to LSU. So tell me a little bit about that background on mental health and how that helped. I assume it helped set the direction of where LSU is now.
Yeah, I would say that there's two pivotal things when I kind of reminisce about how we are where we are today. The first thing that happened was a student athlete suicide. And that was before we were prepared with in-house counseling. In the midst of managing the grief for myself, this was a student athlete I worked with in football, and the team and the coaches, and our extended family, the alumni. We were able to connect locally with a local sports psychologist, young in his practice at the time, and essentially set up a quick contract so that we can work on some grief work. That turned into a more, I'd say semi-permanent position where he was giving us so many hours per week, but he was our full-time person. So that was back in 1998.
Semi-permanent, but 70 hours per week. Did I hear that right?
No, he probably.
Oh, so many hours. Oh, you said so many hours. Okay, okay.
The business, 70 hours per week.
It sounds like coaching, right? That sounds like coaching hours. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, ironically, it did turn into obviously more hours than one would anticipate because that's the way it happens. Yep. So that was the first piece. And I came here, was really hired from Florida State by Jack Marucci. So he came here before me, and intentionally brought a female. I think he wanted a female in this position. I was one of the first females in the SEC to work football. Because of the model that he believed in, which was there needs to be someone present in this training room, this athletic training room that kind of either walks the walk, looks the look, whether I was someone's auntie, was, Brady James, I was TT. Right. And for other people, I was Mama Shelly. So as I've been in the business, it's obviously changed over time, but it made a big difference to have a face in there that was willing to listen about anything and not judge. And that's, and then I was an athletic trainer. I was pretty decent at that. So that was kind of the setup for me coming here. But fast forward to our football coach leaving and Coach Saban coming, within a very short period of time, he came in ready to rock and roll. And when he realized that we are, no different than probably any other school at the time with our share of challenges and that sort of thing, he said, I've got this guy that we're going to use. He comes from Michigan State. We're going to bring him down here. Yes, sir. And so within, probably a couple months, he was on an airplane, came down here. I picked him up in New Orleans, and we started, working together immediately, connected immediately. He was a wonderful human being, still friends with him to this day. And he really helped the program itself build, the football program itself build, but through a holistic lens, which is exactly what I believe in and what really Coach Saban focused on at the time. Like they're not just student athletes. What else are they? And if you don't address all those things, you're not going to really tap into their full potential. So he came to the program that way, and at that time was then collaborating with the sports psychologist that we were using.
Yeah, which is excellent. Is that Dr. Rosen? Tell me what.
Yeah, Dr. Rosen.
That's right, Dr.
Yeah.
Rosen. Okay, yeah, I remember. I didn't see him when I was at Michigan State, but once I left and started working with the Football Coaches Association and we started focusing on this mental health thing, then I realized, okay, there were some things that were happening
He
there
was
while I
there.
was there that I didn't pay attention to. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, Ryan, I wonder about, so you have the Hope Desk, Fund Recovery, and there's other businesses, and the focus of all of them seem to be behavior health, mental health, and a number of different things. I wonder where that comes from in the chapters of your life. The focus on this became important to you.
Well, that's a great question. I could go on forever about this because it's my life.
Yeah.
It is something where I personally struggled with addiction and mental health issues for about 17 years of my life, quietly, secretly, until I couldn't do it anymore. And I guess what you consider a successful career. I had the life that you would look at and say, I've checked all the boxes. I was gainfully employed. I was married, 2 children, all the stats, right, that you need to look at.
Right.
And while I had all those things inside, I was just miserable and hurting and self-medicating. And when I decided to get sober, it was a wonderful change in my life and things got better, but I was really not passionate about my work anymore because my life became recovery, and it was just something I felt pulled to do. And I tried to figure out how I could make a living helping other people the way I was helped. And for the first few years, it was I trained as an interventionist, and I was helping people, helping families navigate addiction and how to get their loved one into treatment. And eventually that evolved into me opening some drug and alcohol treatment centers in Tennessee, a medical detox facility, and sober living homes for men and women. I sold those companies about 4 years ago, and was lucky enough to get called up to Canton, Ohio, where they were trying to solve the mystery of mental health for former players within the Hall of Fame community. And again, no strategic plan here. It just kind of I kind of offered some opinions and suggestions, and they asked me to formalize it into more of a business plan. And here we are years later, and I'm working with Shelly and the people at LSU, and doing the work I care about, the work that for me it's personal and professional. So it's just an everyday thing for me, all day, every day. My family, my friends. It's recovery is kind of the core of what I do, and I take that into every single call we get at the Hope Desk, and my employees are the same way. These are people that have been with me. Many of them started when they were at their lowest, where they had come through maybe my treatment center, and I've watched them grow in their recovery and their lives become full, and that's the thing that really drives me to continue doing the work that I do. And I'm sure the same with Shelly. This is not a financially rewarding job, but it's very fulfilling as a person, and I think that it's the meaning of the work that keeps us showing up every day.
Yeah, which is excellent. So help me out in explaining the structure of the Hope Desk, which you touched on earlier, right? There's a number of mental health professionals of a network of people that people can call on. And then what is Fund Recovery? Because you're also the executive director of that, which I believe is a nonprofit. So tell me about those two, and then where they overlap, and then how they overlap with the institutions such as LSU.
Yeah. So going back to what the Hope Desk does, we
Okay.
know that people are struggling, and it's not always outward struggles. It's often in silence. And I don't know the statistics, Shelly, but I'm sure that there's a large number of student athletes currently that they work with, right? And so the idea that they graduate from college and either go pro or go pro in another career and move, it doesn't mean they're fixed and they're better and they don't need help anymore. It's just that they no longer have the resources there. So one of the things we wanted to do is create a seamless transition from the time they leave campus to the time they land wherever they land next. And so we give them access. That's the first thing, is we give them quick, efficient access to mental health care to continue the work they started on campus. The offering is every level of care. So it's talk therapy, it's medication, psych facilities, drug and alcohol treatment centers, you name it. affordability is always an issue, right? So we want to make sure that we look at things like, are they going to try to use insurance? Do they have cash resources available? And that is where Fund Recovery comes in. Fund Recovery is a 501c3 nonprofit that's been around since 2011. So we're, I guess, 13 years old now, and we have given over $2 million in direct funding for people's care. And so we pay for therapy, we pay for medication or transportation to get to the treatment facility, for example. And we've got a wonderful team of people, volunteers. I'm a volunteer at Fund Recovery as well. And basically, if you need help and we're recommending therapy for you, and it's $125 an hour, but you can only afford $50, Fund Recovery will pay the $75 balance on your behalf. And Fund Recovery pays it directly to the provider.
And is there the process for that, something you have to fill out, or do you if I'm of LSU, if I played some kind of sport at LSU, do I call Shelly and say, I'm not going to be able to afford that, what do I do? Or do I need to go through an application? Like, tell me about how a former student athlete like finds, fund recovery. I imagine I could call Shelly to hear about the Hope Desk or you call it the Tiger Legacy.
Tell me what it's
care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Well,
yeah.
Let me give you an example at Michigan State, because
Okay.
we actually had a former player recently who had bipolar disorder and addiction issues and had no financial resources. But he did have Medicaid in another state than where he lived. So we were able to, he called the Hope Desk number, which is the Alumni State of Mind number at Michigan State, talked to our team. We found out kind of everything that was going on with his mental health and where we needed him to go for care. And the only reason he wasn't able to get the help was because he couldn't get there. So we sent him to the Fund Recovery website and said, fill out this application. And we funded his plane ticket there and back. So he was able to get the care he needs. So they basically work kind of hand in glove, where, we recommend, a certain provider. And if you cannot afford what we're recommending, we can direct you to Fund Recovery, where you can fill out an application to receive a grant. And we've helped over 1,000 people to date receive grants.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I'll ask both of you the next question, and it ties back to what you were talking about, Ryan, with addiction, right? And Shelly, I'm sure, based on my experience as a student athlete, and immediately when I finished student, I was seeing some of the guys I played with, addiction is a thing that's rampant everywhere. But here's what I wonder. For the longest time, so there's a couple of analogies in my head, and you got to forgive me, things come to my head at the same time. The first one is the difference in the war on drugs and the opioid crisis, right? War on drugs in the 80s, mostly black folks, and now it's a war and arrest everybody, throw them in jail, etc. Opioid crisis, provide services for people and try to help out the people who are addicted. You think about athletes, somebody who is in and out of the NFL or in and out of a college football team because they are addicted to marijuana, and it's not looked at as a mental health thing. It's just looked at as a poor decision, and so they're vilified for it. I wonder about the evolution of that. So I have a feeling now that type of addiction is looked at as a mental health thing now. But I wonder what your thoughts on it, Shelly. I'm sure you've seen it on campus, and Ryan, I'm sure you're working with pro athletes and college students. You've seen that, where it's like, hey, can we treat these people like other people who will have this mental health crisis, as opposed to vilifying them because they have this addiction to marijuana use or something like that? Any thoughts on that?
Such a great question, which is why I have a social work hat on half my time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's always been that for me. I don't know. I'm from Miami, so maybe I was exposed to a faster lifestyle, maybe growing up. I don't know.
Yep.
But these student athletes, when you meet them, there's nothing like super fabulous. They're just kids to us.
Yeah.
And so you really don't have that approach with them that others would have, where they are these well-to-do, spoiled, kids that get whatever they want. They're not that. They're members of our society. They struggle the same exact way that we all struggle. And in fact, oftentimes have worse struggles than most of us.
Yeah.
And that, if you go in with that lens, then you really want to help everybody. And you don't see them by color. You don't see them by nationality. I see it, right? But I see them by their challenges. Everyone comes to me in my office, they walk in and it is a new thing every day.
Yeah.
So the trouble I think that we have in athletics is that there's that perspective, and it's married with the discipline policy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the war on drugs probably started. That's the genesis of why we are where we, were at least in the last, up to the last year or two, is that we had to penalize that. And we really didn't have to, but it clearly made it more difficult for kids to want to come forward and ask for help, which is why we are in a different place today than we were even last year. The way we've modeled our policies over time has I think changed in that it's always recognized that the person comes first. And while
Mm-hmm.
we had to have penalties associated with the policy as per the requirements of the NCAA, we always stress the importance of the humanity of it, right? And that whenever we're working with you, this is not about you being able to come back and play again for us. This is about you living long-term, having a fulfilled life, having a productive family, making a living. It's always been about that. And maybe that comes from the trauma of the suicide that I experienced.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that, we all carry those things with us, and we don't want those feelings to go away in vain. And so we pour ourselves into something. And I knew in this scenario with the suicide that this individual was struggling. I didn't know it, right? I learned in hindsight through a lot of avenues what was really going on, but I did not know it. And I was working with this individual day in and day out, and ashamed that I had missed it. And so I think it's super important that we have transitioned to the model we have now, although it does present a whole new set of challenges, as you can imagine.
Yep.
But, the idea that you would be able to get student athletes to come forward to you and talk to you, either knowing that there's penalties associated still, but trusting you enough that you're going to provide them the support, connect them with the resources that are going to be meaningful for them over time, communicating with the parents about the intent of that penalty. I mean, so that the position I'm in is having to call a parent, let them know this is the penalty, but in addition to the penalty, this is what we're doing for him or her. And the tone changes right away. And I always tell the student athlete that my focus with your folks in particular is not going to be about the penalty. I have to communicate that. But what's more important to your parent, because I'm a parent, is that you're taken care of and that we're helping you in some kind of way. And that's just always been the focus for us. So it's not been a difficult transition. And because that was always the talk, administratively, when I moved into this position, I was just able to continue. So there wasn't like this giant transition and we were going to start a different model. We just carried it on.
I think there's the issue being that a student athlete may not know they have an addiction. They're just doing something that they were doing when they were in high school, and they continue to do it. And it becomes a problem now when it starts either interrupting play or they get caught doing or something like that. At some point, they have to be either made aware or they become aware that it is an addiction. And now we have to address that. So I think there's a lot to what you're saying there, Shelly. Brian, I wonder about that aspect of what you've seen and the work you're currently doing and where you're taking your work in the future.
Yeah, I think the university is kind of let's call it the breeding ground of adulthood, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you learn and create new habits there when you're somewhat unsupervised, right? You're probably for the first time outside of your parents' home. You're partially independent, but when you're part of a team, you still have some structure. You've got accountability. You've got rules that typically don't apply to regular students. And then, a lot of those times, or those students challenge some of those rules sometimes. And, sometimes they have consequences, like Shelly mentioned, but some go unnoticed and unchecked. And what I see is the kind of transition points where there are higher likelihoods that this turns into something bigger. So maybe you start with marijuana at LSU, occasional recreational use. maybe you get caught, maybe you don't. But when you get out and you've got, 6 teammates that were drafted in the NFL draft and you were a fringe guy and you didn't, they're off training and you're alone, and you might be using more than you ever did before, because now there's no accountability. And I see a lot of struggles with that transition period because many student athletes identify as an athlete, not as a person.
First.
And
Right.
once that career is
100%.
over and you're out on your own and you don't have that supervision and structure or accountability, things really, the self-medication and the acting out really becomes pretty predictable, honestly. And then when you look at the professionals that we work with, these pros now have money to lose by disclosing issues, right? So they may be in a contract negotiation, and the last thing they're going to go do is admit to a substance use issue or being depressed or anxious, because any odd thing may keep them from signing a massive contract. So the NFL, for example, there was a study a couple of years ago that 70% of pro players at some point are prescribed opioids, and 50% of them have admitted to using them off label, meaning not the way you're supposed to, right? And I think that all of these are indicators that people in that environment are self-medicating. They are struggling with something, and there's not really a great outlet for people to feel safe that they can be vulnerable because they feel like they have too much to lose.
Right. Yeah. That athletic identity, right? Who I am and versus what I do kind of situation is a big thing I've talked about a lot. We mentioned Temple earlier. I talked to Dr. Stephanie Coakley about that in a podcast, and she wrote an article about how she set up the program there at Temple. And I do wonder, I imagine the program at Temple was right around when you first started getting into college athletics, Ryan, there. So I wonder about, because I don't think that's going on there at Temple anymore, but I do wonder about the future and how you want to expand. What I understand is at Michigan State and LSU, I don't know if there are other schools coming online, or tell me about the future of the Hope Desk and Fund Recover in terms of the work you're doing in college athletics.
Yeah, in the college space, we're actually talking to about half a dozen schools right now about onboarding similar programs. We just signed with Michigan football, so they've become a client of ours, and again, we've got a few others that haven't signed yet, so I can't really mention who they are, but they're major conferences, and again, it all kind of flows back to the story we have at LSU, where they're taking a close look at what LSU does. They've got a very good reputation for really being innovative in the mental health space. So people, rarely want to be first. They want to see how it works, and then they want to jump on board. So we're getting a lot of interest from other schools there. We recently got a commitment from the Academy of Country Music. They're going to be a Hope Desk client as well. They've got about 5,000 country music members. Again, because you look at the issues, right? The numbers for addiction, mental health issues, in the entertainment and music space, right? I mean, it's encouraged to party. It's normal to drink on the job when you're in that space, right? And so it's a breeding ground for some mental health issues. And so I think we're looking at expanding into communities that are more likely to struggle with these issues, and at the same time have even less of a reason to come forward because they have so much to lose if they are vulnerable.
Right. Yeah. I find that very interesting there. And then there's performance issues, right? In terms of want to make sure they perform. Or you talk about the entertainment industry. I'm here in Los Angeles. You talk about the drugs that allow you to stay up longer so you can produce whatever you need to produce, right? It's across the board. It's crazy. And I mentioned the war on drugs. My father was a victim of the war on drugs, right? Crack epidemic, all that. It's all close to home. And so I never, in terms of addiction, my brain thinks logical, and I always thought you can attack things with logic, but logic doesn't really work when you talk about addiction. And so the work you do, and really the work you do, Shelly, I think is very important. I'll ask a couple questions here, and then we'll wrap. Shelly, you mentioned the social work thing. You got that master's in social work later in your career, and I tell you what I've learned about social work from doing these podcasts. When you look at micro, macro, and what's the middle one? in the social
Mezzo.
Yeah, and you talk about the understanding, making sure the subgroups, the identities of people in subgroups feel valued within the bigger group, and they feel that group feel valued within the bigger group. In my mind, social work has a PR issue because a lot of people on the outside think it's just about counseling underprivileged children, but realistically, it's about leadership and making sure everybody feels valued within the context of an organization. So I wonder about what was the provenance for getting that. Was it because you knew that you were doing a lot more than athletic training, or tell me about that aspect of your career and why that was important for you?
Yeah, love it. Thank you for asking that. I was in a position, in my life where I was starting to think about what happens at 55. How cool will I look running on the field as I am 55 and 60 and, all those things. And I knew that what I was doing was, borderline counseling. Like it was certainly the referral was the focus, and we had the people I was referring to, but man, just the passion behind that work had always been there. And I was a magnet for it with the student athletes. So I had a choice here at LSU. I was going to just do part-time. I had all the time in the world. So I interviewed in the psychology department, and then I interviewed in the social work department. And without getting into details, it was instantaneous. When I walked into the social work department and sat down with the person, it was an instant connection. The philosophy was exactly really the approach that we specifically have at LSU, and that we're a family. I mean, we say that and everyone says that, but like I was experiencing that firsthand. So I know it's a true thing. I know that the parents of these student athletes would call me and let me know things. And that's what the family system looks like.
Yep. And
I was always about the family systems. I was less about what the diagnosis was, even though I think the diagnostic part's important and critical in care. It's not what's first. I can't, if you can't build the rapport with the student athlete or the person and get them to trust you, there's no sense in having a diagnosis because it doesn't go anywhere. And so fundamentally, there was a difference in those two approaches. And the social work one, it felt right. Like I literally, as an athletic trainer, had helped someone get on Medicaid. I've literally helped someone, arrange childcare for their toddler who was, couldn't be there because he was at football practice. I was doing when I look back, I was doing social work, and I do like to look at problems holistically. So it's less about the diagnosis and how that diagnosis impacts you and your immediate family, but the systems approach. Like, you don't have a bank account because your parent might be taking your money because they need your money, but you're left here without any food. What can we do here to help both those problems? How do I look at that from both angles? So it was just a social work. It was a social work perspective that I had always been working within without knowing it was social work. And oddly enough, as an extra credit assignment for one of my classes, I was searching for an extra 5 points. A teacher gives you the opportunity to look for organizations that you're interested in. And I looked up social work and sport and just started maybe the year before I had searched it on Google was Alliance for Social Workers in Sport.
Okay.
There's a thing.
Yeah, right.
And
all the
what
signs,
an incredible community. Like there's a large group of people now. And these people, this alliance is actually very impactful in working with the NCAA. So they are the movers and shakers, and it's not to discount any other mental health group. They're all great. We actually here have LPCs, we have social workers, we've got the variety pack, and I think that variety pack's important because everyone comes to the mental health space for different reasons, and I felt like it was just such a perfect fit, and it has been since the day I started.
Yeah, I like that. Ryan, I'll ask you this last question. We can wrap up. I wonder about all the providers around the country, like approaching a provider, onboarding a provider, letting them know about the fund recovery, about insurance, about how this thing works. I have a couple questions in my head. The first one is the network of providers the same for Michigan State, for National Football Hall of Fame, for LSU, for the country? It's the same network, I imagine, right? And then B, what goes into that, right? In terms of approaching someone new, like Sacramento, California, we want to make sure we have somebody there, or tell me the structure of the organization in terms of team members who go out and call and make these things happen. Like, give us a little more insight actually into the Hope Desk and how you do what you do?
Well, that's great. The main thing we do is we already have a group of let's just call them core providers that are world renowned places like Betty Ford or Mayo, and we've got a great group here in Nashville. We've got the Menninger Clinic in Texas, Lindner Center in Ohio. Those are great, but really where most of our calls come in, they're looking for a lower level of care. So they're looking for therapy to start, even though they may need a higher level, they're not coming in volunteering for that. So we want to just get them connected. So we've got life coaches, we've got therapists, we have small practices, we have large practices that have several hundred providers. And what we do is essentially do a vet of the provider. So we want to make sure that they're licensed and credentialed to do what they're saying they do. We look at their website to make sure that they're legitimate. We do a soft vet where we reach out to other mental health providers if we're not familiar with them and just ask if they've heard of them and have they heard good things, any red flags. And then we have a small form that they'll fill out, just basically checking out that they do some of the things we do or we require, such as HIPAA might be an example, like just acknowledging you do that. Are you accredited with JACO or CARF? And so we'll take them through a short vetting process. As we add new clientele, a lot of times it's an area where we haven't had a provider. So I think it was Shelly, I think it was LSU that had our first one in Europe. We hadn't thought about Europe, but they had an alumni who had left the school and was living in Europe, and we needed to find a provider there. And we're like, oh man, we hadn't thought of that. So we had to go start a vetting process for Europe, and we've done the same thing in Canada. And so if it's a place we don't have covered, we can quickly find the provider, just because it's in the mental health community, it's a very, very small community. And, it's even the names you mentioned, right? Like Dr. Coakley and, the fact that her and Shelly and I both know her, it's just it's a tight knit community. And if I don't know them, I can call Shelly, and if she doesn't know them, we can call somebody. Like eventually we're going to know the who's who. So we really have a pretty streamlined process. We're really not looking to add more providers now. Frankly, we're looking to add lives to utilize the providers. So one thing that we don't do is we don't necessarily broadcast fund recovery. Like I'm not going to buy a billboard on the interstate saying, free treatment, because as a nonprofit that pays for care, we would go broke in about a week, if not a day. So we strategically work with our Hope Desk clients to make sure that we have enough funding for their constituents' needs and not necessarily for every man. Although we do help anybody that does call, we don't broadcast that.
Yeah. Is that so all the stuff you just said, the vetting, that's done in-house with Hope Desk, right? And then fund recovery, you have like fundraisers? Do you have events? So tell me how you get funding to provide the service.
We do. We have phenomenal events. We've got a celebrity pickleball tournament coming up in November.
Oh wow, okay.
Here in Nashville. We do an annual event in Nashville that's a concert and auction and golf tournament. This year it's going to be, I should say it's in 2025. It's in April of 2025. We'll have a golf tournament during the day with 18 Pro Football Hall of Famers, and people buy foursomes and sponsorships. And then we'll have some kind of concert that evening with a really nice auction and an awards dinner. So we do those two big events. We have some regional ones. So in August, we're doing one in Denver with the Broncos. And then we receive grants from various organizations, whether it's the state of Tennessee, federal grants, or we'll apply to private grants. So, large corporations may offer financial support for mental health initiatives. So we have a team that helps us write grants.
That's super interesting. So this is on your mind at all times, right?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Are you like people who work in college athletics who don't drink enough water or get enough sleep?
No, I actually do both, because I'm
good.
my wife and I always joke that I'm like a gremlin, and as long as I'm fed the right way, get enough rest, and I'm hydrated, I'm ready to function. And I should include, I have to get my wiggles out every day, so I have to exercise, I have to do something. So for me though, it's I like to do it because I like to tell other people how I did it, right? And it's what I did was, I did not figure this out on my own. I think that's the number one thing. And when Shelly hit on it, it's a family systems thing. It's not, addiction is not in a vacuum. Mental health is not in a vacuum. Like if it is in your family, it's impacting you and it's impacting your decisions. And I think that when it comes to taking care of this, it's a really hard problem to look inside and solve. So you have to reach out to someone that's safe, someone that doesn't have an agenda, and can really look at you and say what you need to hear, and do it with, a kind voice and soft eyes, and not judgmental and harsh. But, and that's where I think Shelly and I have the same message, but it comes from, one of us is a licensed social worker, one of us is a recovered addict, but the message is the same, right? And I look at it, and I'd be the last person to judge someone that I'm offering suggestions to. And what I say is never a mandate. It's just a suggestion, and they can take it or leave it.
Yep.
But I'm just going to say, this is what works for me. And if they don't want to do it, that's okay. And that's our philosophy throughout. Anybody that calls Hope Desk is, what we're offering is advice and guidance and suggestion. And if you're not ready to hear it or don't want to take it, you don't have to. But we want to know, or we want people to know, that it's okay to ask. It's okay to ask the what you think is a stupid question, or say that one thing that you've never told anybody, because that might be the thing that really sets your life on the right course.
Yeah. Shelly, I imagine you provide that same type of environment there at LSU too.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's always been about harm reduction for me. Like I can't, if we all grow up with alcohol in our households, and I know we all don't grow up that way, but even a casual, right, Friday night glass of wine or whatever the case may be, those things change over time. I mean, they change for each person in that house based on what their experience is, but based on their genetics, based on where they live, and who am I to judge, right? So when I see it. And in this unique perspective I have in athletics, because we have a multidisciplinary approach where we have academics at the table, we have the coaches at the table, we have strength coaches at the table, you get a really good picture. Like, so you might be an excellent athlete, but you're struggling to read in the academic center, which means you're struggling in the classroom. That leads to a lot of hopelessness and unworthiness and vulnerability. Imagine saying, look, I know you're struggling with reading. I'm cool with that. Why don't we get you with this particular academic advisor who has worked with athletes before, like so-and-so learned how to read by his second year here. He was reading. And all of a sudden you talked about something that no one has ever wanted to talk about. Yeah. But yet he has to be able to read a menu in 4 years, or his contract in 4 years. And so it's just done in a different way. So it doesn't feel like it's their fault. But all those approaches to me feel like harm reduction, right? That was one little step that we could take to help eliminate a barrier that he or she would have had as part of their transition. So when Ryan talks about the transition having happened, by the time he's really getting his hands on them, it's part of Tiger Legacy Care, there's still transition that we're doing from the time they're a freshman to the time that they're a senior. And you can't miss that opportunity, because once they're gone from here, if they don't trust you, they're not coming back. And so a program like this that we've set up, it really works best. It's not that it couldn't work, but it absolutely works best when there's a progression of services that you offer them from the time that they come here. Hopefully they come with services, right? Hopefully they already have seen somebody. That makes it even easier for us, because they don't have to break down these, stigmas of seeing a counselor. They want that help. But imagine being a 17-year-old, being able to walk into a facility, a school that has these services, and then you continue to carry that on. I mean, you are then fixing these problems in the critical time frame where your brain is still developing. So then by the time you are transitioned out, you do realize you're more than just an athlete. Yep. And by the way, you could also be an elite athlete and still be more than just the elite athlete, in a place like this. So it's been a really neat opportunity to be able to, build the program, watch it transition, and see it through to a full product.
Yeah, which is excellent. And I really appreciate the work you do there at LSU, the work that everybody actually in the similar positions that you are around college athletics do for people who, go to college, are college students and happen to participate in college athletics. And then Ryan, it sounds like you are actually trying to save the world one person at a time, which is very important, right? In terms of you talk about addiction, you talk about mental health, you talk about all the other things that we as people deal with specifically here in the United States. So I really appreciate you two joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you, Tai.
Yep. That was Ryan Cain. He's the CEO of the Hope Desk and Executive Director of Fund Recovery, and Shelly Mullenix. Shelly is the Senior Associate Athletics Director of Health and Wellness at LSU. And of course, I am Tai Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.